I'm continuing the video on what interviewers look for in candidates. And another important tip that Victor has shared is that in consulting, you're often right, but never without factual justification. The crux of this tip is that whatever you say as a consultant, you should be able to back it up with facts. So, in an interview, you should never or try as much as possible not to say things that you cannot back up, things that you cannot give the data to justify. And of course, you might feel this sounds uptight, but why is it important? When you say something, you are expressing not only your point of view, but also your firm's point of view on the topic. Therefore, it's really important that you audit what you say in front of a client to make sure that you're saying things that you can justify. Otherwise, you have made your entire organization look like they've said something they didn't really know or they couldn't back up. Of course, Victor shares that this is one of the biggest nightmares for partners at consulting firms when a first-year consultant shoots off his or mouth just saying something that they cannot factually justify. So therefore, it's really important to choose your words carefully. For example, when you say, this always happens, then your interviewer can find 5 scenarios where that didn't happen and ask you to justify why you said it always happens. Now, of course, you might feel, well, why so uptight? But it just goes back to the point that you are representing not only yourself, but your entire organization, which is full of hundreds or maybe thousands of experienced professionals. So you want to make sure that you are giving a good look to your entire organization and all the wonderful people that work there. Another important thing to keep in mind when dealing with clients, which is also something that an interviewer will look out for when interviewing a candidate in a case interview, is how they present their solutions. So there's this concept of being right versus being right diplomatically. So the way you present your conclusions matters, especially emotionally or diplomatically to your client. Keep in mind that sometimes the client is not necessarily convinced of the value that a consultant is bringing. Now, of course, the fact that they are employing a consultant to work on their case means that, there's for some reason or the other, they feel that they need help from a consultant or a consultancy firm. But maybe deep down, they don't really believe that you can bring out any insights that are different from what they already know. And so when you eventually get your conclusions, it's important that you have that emotional intelligence to be able to present your conclusions in a diplomatic way, and you can actually support your conclusions. So whatever recommendations you're making, you can actually support them so that the clients can receive it and be able to potentially act on it. Victor gives this important analogy of a person who has to go into a brain surgeon's office for the first time, and the surgeon didn't have any access to their medical history or did any tests, and then says, I have bad news, you're dying, I need to do an emergency brain surgery in the next 2 hours or you won't live to see tomorrow morning. Most people in that scenario will feel, what? You didn't even do any tests, you didn't even examine me, you've not had any access to my medical history, and you want to drill into my brain? No way. Now, of course, that's maybe a little bit dramatic, but so is for a client who is trying to receive some feedback or recommendations from you. You can't just say your recommendations. You have to be able to support your recommendations with facts and deliver it in such a way that the clients can see that you did your homework and you're suggesting something that will be most likely beneficial for the client. An important part is that your factually supported recommendations should be in a language that the clients can understand. And this is important for 2 main reasons. First, if the client just didn't understand what you were saying, they will most likely not go ahead with your recommendation. They will not take action on what you've suggested. But also, if there were senior clients on the call and they didn't follow your argument, they'll likely not tell you that they were confused. They'll nod their heads as if they understand, but then they will not support your final recommendation. And so the point here is that you don't want to make your senior clients look stupid. You want to make sure that you are presenting your case in a way that everyone can follow. And then it's a lot easier to get buy-in into your recommendation and get people to act on the insights that you have suggested or provided. Victor makes an important point. He says, if your clients don't follow your arguments, guess whose fault is it? If they don't follow your argument, someone is getting fired from the relationship and it wouldn't be the client. So it's really important to keep this in mind when engaging with clients, and also when going for an interview. Know that your interviewer is trying to see how you present your solutions, your conclusions, to make sure you're presenting them in a diplomatic manner. Another thing that interviewers look out for in a consulting interview is the airplane test, aka don't be an asshole. This is a common statement you hear, especially in consulting circles, where people want to know if you are someone that they can spend 3 hours on an airplane sitting next to. This usually deals with interpersonal skills and how you interact with your client. You want to make sure you don't offend them. You don't want piss them off over your behavior or because of how you've reacted or engaged with them. You want to make sure that you are making friends, building bridges, rather than coming off as arrogant or coming off as the know-it-all person. That way, it's likely that some people who didn't even like you being there in the first place, who thought you were an outsider, will feel this is the perfect opportunity to get this person out of the door because they didn't like the way you said something or the way you behaved or even the way you presented your solution, your conclusions. So it's really important, the airplane test, to make sure that you are being friendly, you are being polite, and you are representing yourself and your organization very well and not giving anyone a case to feel like you are badly behaved or you were an asshole. Victor gives an example of one of his managers who came from Germany. Germans are known to be quite efficient and they want to get to the facts. And because this client was from Germany and had to work in the Midwest in the US, he would ignore the small talk and ask directly for the data and let's get to business. Obviously, this offended a few people, and Victor had to tell him, hey, look, if you want the cooperation of people here, you have to engage in their small talk. And this is a great example of how cultural differences and also personality differences, being aware of them would help as a consultant to win business and, more importantly, not lose business. The other point that Victor mentions about what an interviewer is looking for in any interview is the interviewer is looking for a certain mindset, a certain type of perspective from the candidate. You need to understand a concept called process excellence. In this case, it means being able to follow a process consistently to solve a problem. You want to be able to follow a structured analytical problem-solving process and also reach the right conclusion or the correct conclusions based on that process. Now, of course, it's also important to note that while it's great to get to the proper or the correct answer, the way you got there is even more important, because sometimes people feel you just got lucky this time to get the answer. And so in another scenario, when presented with another case, people want to know that you can follow a similar approach to get your answer and make sure that when you eventually have to sit in front of a client, you have an established way you can solve a problem versus just winging it and hopefully getting the right answer. Therefore, in an interview, the interviewer, the examiner, is trying to see how the candidate is walking through the process to make sure this is not someone who is just getting lucky, but somebody who can be sure to get to a correct answer, even though it might take a longer time. Therefore, the process excellence, the way you achieve your problem, is as important as the answer to the problem itself. I think a final point here is how consultants think. Consultants always think in terms of that process excellence. They want to make sure that they are able to present the big picture both to the layman, the frontliners, and also to the CEO. Therefore, it's really important when you're going for a case interview to be able to follow your thought process and communicate your thought process so the interviewer can hear it and see how you are thinking. The last point here is why consulting firms value strong CEO level communication skills. People often say that consultants come into the company, they talk with the frontliners, they talk with the people on the production floor, for example, repackage what those people have said and sell it for $1 million to the management. And while this might be somewhat correct, what's sometimes missing in this conversation is the fact that the consultant has been able to synthesize all the information he gathered from those on the production floor to be able to present it to the management in such a way that they understand this is the problem and these are the ripple effects of this problem. This is what happens when you act on this recommendation. This is what happens if you don't. This is the cost, this is the benefit, etc. So this synthesis, this ability to provide clarity to the executive, who will then probably risk his or her career in moving the organization in the direction that the consultant has recommended, is really critical because the stakes are high. Therefore, the candidate, the consultant rather, needs to be able to present this information to the CEO in such a manner that they can understand and they can take action on it. So when you're going in for a case interview, you need to be able to communicate your insights well, communicate your insights to top level management in such a way that they can connect the dots. So these are the other tips you need to keep in mind when going for a case interview. Thank you for watching.